Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund.
Because of the kind of organization that we are, we really had kind of a dream, if you will, to be able to restore a building or to reuse a building, to repurpose something. And we've looked at other buildings, and when this came on the market a year ago, we took a look at it and we really saw some tremendous potential. We were very excited about it. So we started looking at it, did a feasibility study, and really came to the point where we decided it actually would be cost effective for us to do this. Then we started looking at what could we do with it, and that was probably the most exciting. We knew we wanted to really recapture kind of the feel for downtown, to get back to looking like multiple buildings instead of that big white wrap that was around the building. And this was originally 4 different buildings. So that was really what we were going for. So we started to do a lot of research, ended up getting a bunch of pictures over the years. And let's just say that the 60s and 70s, while they may not have been that good in clothing styles, weren't that good in building styles either. So there's a few things we knew we didn't want to go back to. So ultimately, what our dream was to be able to go back to something that was really more the true historic feel. We did a lot of research. We went to the depot, we got pictures from them. We got pictures from various people in town who would call us up and say, here you're looking at it, or we heard that they had pictures. A couple of my personal favorites are some that we got from the depot, and it shows the building. One is in 1917 with sailors marching down the street on 3rd Street in front of the building. And I don't know if a lot of people remember, but 3rd Street was originally kind of the main street here in town a long time ago. We have a picture from, it's probably the 40s or the 50s, that show a group of women having a race with pancakes and frying pans in front of the building. It gets a really good picture of what the building looked like at that point in time. We have a picture that shows a display in the window, which was war bonds and ration coupons and of the war effort. A window that would be kind of right over to my left here, the main window of the building. Upstairs, there are about 20 offices that are still kind of captured in time. And one of them was the office where people would come to get ration coupons. There was lawyers' offices, there was a beauty shop. We have some in the Bemidji book, 1940s to 90s, we actually know who was in some of those offices. And so this building has been, just really a cornerstone of downtown for over 100 years.
We are here in the upper level of the old Wells Fargo building, and I am Jim Steenerson, the Senior Program Officer for the Northwest Minnesota Foundation. Everything we're standing on here and looking at is approximately 100 years old, although some of the finishings are a little bit newer than that. Here we are at 2012, so this building really hasn't been touched in the upstairs area for the last 60 to 70 years. If you look at the wallpaper, this wallpaper is easily 60 to 70 years old. Who knows, it might go back even further than that. It's got a retro style, so some of this may be even coming back into style now. The outside walls, as you can see, have got windows that are all boarded up, and our intent is to open up all of these original openings and put in new window frames and new windows that will match the original appearance of the building. So from the outside, the upper level will look as close as possible to when it was actually constructed back in the early 1900s. So it won't be a totally historic renovation or preservation project, but our intent is to try to bring it back as close as possible to the original appearance of the building. What we're looking at here is a hole that was knocked actually through the lath and plaster to show the exterior wall structure. The bricks that are laid in here are common brick, and then outside that is another layer of brick, which is the finished layer. And this was a common construction for brick walls back in that day and age, and actually it's not so uncommon today either. The lath and plaster is interesting. If you look at this, you can see the lath were all nailed on individually on all of the little furring strips that were installed here, and the plaster is actually made up of a mixture of concrete and horsehair that was embedded in the concrete. And the purpose of the horsehair was just to add a little bit of strength to the wall structure. One interesting feature about this, of course, is that there's absolutely zero insulation in this wall cavity. So back then, in the early 1900s, this building was heated with coal, which is a very, very cheap source of heat. They really didn't have the types of insulation systems that we have now, so it wasn't a big deal. Coal was cheap, and that's how they heated the building. Yeah, these are for signage that was attached on the outside of the building. And these will come out, of course, because they're just hanging there right now. So everything you see up here will be all gutted out, and then we'll be rebuilding the entire upper level. The doors that you're looking at here are all original millwork that were installed when this upstairs area was finished. And so these are all approximately 100 years old too. Well, there's several interesting features on the door. One is the upper transom window, which has a number on there. That's a backwards 4, as you can see. But these were opened to allow ventilation for each one of the individual offices. That was the purpose of that. You can see the hinges right up there. So those were just propped open for ventilation. All of the doors have got kind of a frosted embossed glass, which is a kind of unique feature. You see this on some entry doors now, but of course this was pretty unique back in that day and age. Another feature of the doors is the very, very wide trim. And this was typically either a mahogany or an oak type trim, and it's a full 7/8 or 1 inch deep trim and real wide, about 6 to 7 inches. And that was also typical of that era. The other feature, if you look at the lock down here, it's got the old skeleton key lock in there. So this one doesn't work so well, but I think some of the other door handles still operate freely. Since then, they've added another tumbler here for security purposes, but this was the original lock back in that day and age, and they used the old skeleton keys. And so the janitor probably had a big ring on his belt, and he had a different key for every office that he had to get in to clean in the evening. So you look at that, and that door still swings very, very nicely, thank you. And it's been hanging there for 100 years, and it still works great. The woodwork in this upper level, like I mentioned earlier, is all original millwork that was installed when the building was constructed back in the early 1900s. It has a really, really wide trim around the doors. And one of the neat features about the door trim is the crown molding that was installed. So if you look at that, you get an idea of what the original color was like, and some of the scrolling features that were prevalent on all of the molding. And if you also look at the finish on the trim, you can see that that's almost perfectly clear type of wood. It has virtually no knots, and so that's really, really high-grade trim. This day and age, this type of trim would sell for easily $5 to $6 a board foot. So that one little chunk that you're looking up there, in this day and age would cost about $12 to $15 to buy that one board, and the crown molding would cost probably another $15 to $20 just for those two pieces of wood that you're looking at. We talked a little bit about the transom windows that are above the doors in the hallway, and this device is actually an operator that was used to open and close those transom windows for ventilation. You would push this button in and then push this rod up and down. That activated that little lever system up there to move the window out or closed again. So it was just a simple way to control that window and get some fresh air into the room for either ventilation or for heat. And this is entrance. We don't know to what, but obviously that's a hand-lettered sign. And you can see the frosted glass again. And another interesting feature in this door, it's got an old mail drop. So evidently they got individual mail delivery with all of the offices up here. And I can just imagine the postman walking down the hall and opening up each one of these individual mail slots and popping mail through the door, and no doubt it just piled up on the floor inside the offices. One of the interesting features we found when we started exploring this upstairs was this old fuse breaker box. And this is a really, really old piece of equipment. If you look at the door, it's got all of the different rooms numbered here, so each one of these is assigned to a specific circuit on the panel. And these are all numbered too, just the same way that you would find a current breaker panel in the modern day and age would have the names of all of the different rooms written along the sides. These are all numbered, and as you can see, these are all fuses which aren't used anymore in the current technology. But this is an old original breaker system, probably one of the earliest types that was ever used. The breaker panel was called a double break, so it actually had two different types of protection system. And the trademark up here is Frank Adam Panel Board. This company was established in 1891. So this was probably installed in the early 1900s as part of this original construction and served, I would guess, until probably the 1940s or 50s when the new technology was installed down in the lower level of the entire building. Here's an interesting feature. This one has actually got the name of one of the rooms. It's barber shop. None of the other ones are labeled. This one's empty, otherwise they're just room numbers. But this one says room number 18 was the barber shop. But this is an old piece of history for this building. And as you can see, it's a pretty massive chunk of equipment. The picture you're looking at right now, that's a ceramic insulator, and attached to that is a single piece of wire. That's called knob and tube wiring. And that was the original wiring that was actually used to wire homes in this whole region and across the United States. It's really got poor insulation, and it relied upon the air around it for insulating. And so they had to screw those porcelain insulators into the wood, and then they would connect the wires to it, and that's how they ran wiring when these businesses and homes were first originally electrified. And so you still find that type of wiring systems in older homes throughout our region, but for the most part it's been removed or replaced when homes are upgraded. And what you're looking at here are two wires and two insulators, and if you look closely you can see that the wire runs right through the insulator and is protected from the wood. Without having the insulator, of course, this would be a fire hazard and the building would burn down very quickly. One of these wires carried electricity and the other one was a neutral wire. So it didn't have a ground like modern wiring systems do now. So they just relied on the hot and then the neutral for their electricity. This is another old panel that has some wiring relics in it. And we think that this little box back there, that insulator, was probably part of the original phone system. Over here on the left side, you can see one of the insulators sticking out, and these were used to run the knob and tube wiring through the stud cavities. We managed to pull this one out far enough so you can actually see what it looks like. The coloration is a little bit different on these. These are brown. All of the other ones that were typically used for electric wires are white. So I suspect that maybe this may have been used just for a telephone wiring box, but they still use the insulators to run the wiring through. On the inside of the door, there's some writing. We've got a 218 there. I think this is before the days of area codes, so that's interesting, but that's still our area code now. Who knows, maybe that was the first area code inscription for the Bemidji area. And that one's got an 8, and we think it's Gus, and then a last name that we can't really tell what it is. It looks like a Taurtner, perhaps, Troutner. I wonder if there's a Gus Troutner out there who did some wiring here. The original brick structures over the building had actually archways over some of the openings, so you can see there where they were knocked off when the facade was reconstructed. But if you look at the upstairs area of the building, the stone lintels that run across the bottom of the windows, for the most part, are still intact, so those can be salvaged. And the brick exterior is actually in good enough condition on the whole upper level, except for the very, very top courses, so that we'll be able to restore that, do new tuck pointing, replace some of the bricks where they've been damaged, but the top section of this structure should be able to be salvaged and restored to almost original condition. The ornate areas along the upper runs on the building are still pretty much intact too, and those are really neat architectural features of the building. These features right here are part of the original structure when the bank building was constructed in the 1900s. This is a scrolled piece of stone. There's the name of a company down here, and you can see how this was scrolled all the way up. And here you can see some of the actual writing that was done when the reconstruction was done to cover this. So a contractor obviously used this to figure out some measurements for the reconstruction, instead of taking time to go find a piece of paper to do his calculations. When the contractors were pulling off some of the brick that was installed in the 1950s, they uncovered some of the old structure here, and here we have an inscription. It reads Sunshine, September 30th, 1965, and it's signed by Don Larson. We have absolutely no idea who Sunshine was or who Don Larson was, but he evidently was one of the workers who was either working on the building, or perhaps he wandered by at the point in time where they're just covering this up and decided that he would put his little signature on there. So that's one of the pieces of history that we found on the old building so far. Well, I think the work that we're doing on these buildings is not to do an accurate historical restoration, because as we uncovered the facade here, you can see that there's an awful lot that's been destroyed that's not recoverable. But our purpose is to try to bring the exterior appearance of the building back as close as possible to what it probably looked like back in the early 1900s. But in reality, it'll be more like what the streetscape looked like in the 40s and 50s. And that should blend very nicely with the appearance of the rest of the buildings here along 3rd Street. Well, when we originally bought this building, we really weren't too optimistic that we'd be able to save a lot of the exterior facade. And so we're very pleased that at least the upper level of this building and the upper level of the building on the end will be able to be restored to near original condition. And we're going to do our very best, and our architect is also going to do his best to try to match those features with any new brick and masonry that will be installed, so that it will be a nice looking building when we're done. It won't be totally original, but it will match the streetscape that we have here right now, and we think it's going to be a great addition to this corner of downtown Bemidji.
This is such a prominent corner downtown, and being able to add this vitality and this life to this corner and bring 20 jobs downtown. And when we're doing training, another 35 to 40 people, or for meetings, we just feel this energy downtown, and we're so excited about being downtown. So the hardest thing right now is we don't get to move in until probably November, and it's going to be a long summer.
If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org. If you have segment ideas pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org. Common Ground Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund by the vote of the people on November 4th, 2008.